Okay, good afternoon. I think it's 8:15 CET. I don't know which time zones you're all in, but I propose to get going. My name is Hans van der Drift, and I'm going to share my screen to also do the introduction. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, good afternoon, is the value of, or the power of simulations, specifically games that also in changes is exploiting for a process that we call sales and operations planning. And the outline of this session, I'm going to sort of give the cliffhanger away straight away, is that S&OP, or IBP sometimes called, has become an essential process in many companies, and it can create fantastic value. It has a few problems though. It's a slow process with a long planning horizon, typically 12 months, 18 months looking forward, very slow feedback loop. And the consequence therefore is that if you want to improve, if you want to learn, if you want to update your process, it's going to be really slow. And therefore, that's one of the reasons why simulations, and specifically serious games, can really drive breakthroughs in understanding and competency development in this particular process. So that's going to be the outline of the session, or the main conclusion of the session that we're going to use again when we wrap up. If you have questions in the meantime, by the way, feel free to step in. Maybe briefly introduce who I am. I'm one of the partners. My name is Hans van der Drift. I'm one of the partners at Involvation. We share, in fact, the office within Change, but we are a completely different company. We specialize in supply chain management, and basically we offer three services. The main one is consulting, but also really big in training, learning and development. And next to that, we also do implementations, big projects, interim management. All focusing on the same area, which is supply chain management. You may notice, if you've seen us or seen our website, that we only have senior consultants. We don't hire any juniors, and we have customers in more or less all industry segments, including fast-moving chemicals, pharma, electronics, even banks, etc. And sales and operations planning, or integrated business planning, is one of our main areas of expertise. Okay, so that's me. One question to you. We're in a small group, so we can keep it a bit informal. Also to basically test a little bit what level we should use. Can I ask you to maybe unmute and describe to me how you would define S&OP? What do you think S&OP is to you? Does anybody have a clue?
Can I start then?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I would define sales and operations planning as the link or the glue between the strategic area or the strategic level and the operational level. So it's a tactical plan and tactical process that binds these two levels together.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That's I think that's spot on. One of the definitions, definitely one of the roles that this process can have. So thanks. Any additional views, people that would like to build on this view? Okay, let's because I brought two slides just to really briefly
introduce. Can I say one more thing? Yeah. Sorry about that, but
no, sure, go ahead.
You can say that is the horizontal level, but you can also have the vertical level, that was a vertical level, the hierarchical level, and you can also have the horizontal level, because it's also the glue between sales and manufacturing and operations. It's actually a process for them to get together and talk and resolve the issues that they have.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, super. I couldn't have said it better. So thanks for that. I did bring two slides, very high level, to just introduce the concept. in the core, how S&OP started several decades ago, it is basically the main objective is to balance supply and demand. So basically start with how much we're going to, how much we believe we're going to sell in the next period, the next few months, or the next 12 months or 18 months rolling even. And then we check, well, are we able to supply this? If yes, well, great, we sign it off. If not, we will look for solutions to make sure that we can still serve the market, what we believe they will want to buy from us. And if we really can't solve that, then we need to go to revert back to the demand side to see how we cope, whether we do allocation, whether we need to decide something. So this is the real basic core of the process, how it started now many decades ago. And it's basically doing what you're saying about your horizontal link. So it's basically linking sales, marketing, with supply chain and manufacturing to make sure that it all stays nicely in balance. That's not the be all and end all. It's not the end of the story, because this is only the beginning. Again, another very high level picture that you may have seen before. This is where we take S&OP one step further, and it's going to get more close to what you defined as your horizontal, as your vertical link. This is where we are moving towards what's called one set of numbers, where we have on the left hand picture, you can see different supply chain, the different company functions, customer development, marketing, finance, manufacturing, I know, and only as examples. And typically what happens is that these functions have different views of the world, different ambitions, different incentives, and also different plans, and they're not necessarily aligned. And if all these functions are working based on their own plans and interpretations, well, the experience learns that the total is not going to work so well. And what S&OP or integrated business planning, if you like, at the more advanced version, is trying to do is to move towards one consensus plan. Doesn't really need to be one plan, but it's based on the same assumptions, the same data, basically everything to try and make sure that the different business functions are working based on the same strategy, the same assumptions, the same data to realize that exact strategy, to realize the overall objectives. So very, very high level, a bit conceptual maybe, but what I'm trying to paint basically is a picture of two levels of S&OP. The first level is really basic demand supply balancing, very important, you need it. And then building on that, we start to integrate more with other functions, specifically finance, to make sure that we really get one plan for the whole business. Now, why would you want that? A number of years ago, we did a little bit of research amongst a number of our bigger customers, about 20 leading multinationals, where we had done S&OP projects, and we asked them basically, well, what changed after your successful S&OP implementation, and which KPIs improved? And 70% of those companies said, so 3/4 more or less, said, well, actually our profitability went up. Our on-time deliveries went up, our new product introductions were more successful, our inventory levels went down, our costs went, etc. So quite a number of very, very attractive KPIs that most businesses will be looking for. Gartner, a much bigger company than us, did a similar research with more companies even, and showed very similar conclusions. Just to stress the point that when you get it right, S&OP and IBP can be fantastic processes that add a lot of value. But what also is then a bit surprising is that quite a few companies struggle to sustain an effective S&OP process. Many companies run a process to some extent, and some very successful, but quite a few, more than half probably, are not happy with the process. It either fades away, it's not effective. And IBP at the more advanced version, far lower, even though it may not even be all that complex. So the question is why? Why, if all these benefits are really true, how come that people and companies struggle with implementing it? Now, what I'd like to introduce is a change model that we use in our S&OP processes and IBP processes that I think is relevant for this observation. And that basically says, well, if I've got a vision in this example, my vision is to improve those KPIs by implementing an S&OP process. How do I get to that action? How do I realize this? And what we'll see is we will need 4 aspects that need to be addressed. Aspect 1 is what we call the why, the meaning. So what's in it for me? Why are we going to do this? How does it link with the strategy? And what's in it for me? This is probably the main one, the burning platform, but there's only one. The second one is we call the willingness, and basically this is even if we've convinced somebody that it's really important, how do we get him or her to move, to really act on that step? So that's related to the previous one, but it's not the same. Even when somebody's convinced, still needs to allocate the time, etc., to get on with it and really make sure that it starts to happen. Then we get what we call the logic. This is the processes, the KPIs, the systems, all the hard stuff, where we often feel comfortable. Very important, can be really complex, specifically when we start to talk about systems. But generally, this is in the hands of supply chain, and that's the function that normally wants this process. So this is in most of the cases not the issue. Can be the biggest part of the work, but maybe not the biggest part of the concerns. And then the last one, again, very relevant for this presentation, is what we call ability. So even if we've done our homework, the logic's great, we've convinced them that it's a fantastic process, they really want to get on with it. If they're not able to run that process, well, again, nothing's going to happen, obviously. And to get from vision to action, basically what we say is, well, there are multipliers in between, because and there are multipliers because if one of these 4 aspects is 0, well, the total will be 0, and we're not going to get to any concrete results. The common pitfall is to focus on the logic only, to make and to focus on the systems and the processes and the data, etc. And what you find is that if we do this, the project is probably going to fail, because we forget about the others. So we're not going to focus on the logic today at all, but we will focus a little bit on the meaning and also on ability, because that's the topic of this session. If there's any questions or remarks about this, then again, feel free to step in. Okay, so let's first focus on the why, the meaning part, because we believe this is really the main part. If the why is not clear, goes for any large project, then yeah, it's probably not going to work. S&OP is not a means to an end. It's a means to an end. The means should be the KPIs or the whatever. It's not an objective in itself. And that's not so trivial for many people. And there are quite a few intrinsic reasons why implementing and sustaining S&OP successfully is more difficult maybe than many other processes. Because even when the why is clear, many companies discover that implementing and sustaining the process is tough. And I think there's a few reasons for this. The first one is that it's a cross-functional process. We already saw in this simplified picture where we had marketing and sales and manufacturing and the supply chain, etc., all required in the process. But what I'm sure you know if you work in a company is that each function looks at the world through different glasses, has a different mental picture of the world. And the bigger the companies get, the more important functional incentives will become. And they are very often not aligned. So we're trying to get into a process to get to decisions with a group of people that have different pictures of the world, that are trying to achieve different objectives, trying to optimize different KPIs. So that's inherently maybe not so easy. The second one, and that I mentioned that in the first slide already, it's a slow process, typically monthly, longer planning horizon. If you have a proper process, 12 months, 18 months, maybe even 24 months, and you take decisions about that period. Now that means that the impact of those decisions, so before you see the results of those decisions, it's going to take forever. You're going to be in a new position when they get effective. So you don't really get, or only have a very slow feedback loop. So how do you know that this process is really adding value? Is it successful? And if that's not so clear, well, how are we going to keep all those functions engaged? And how are we going to improve the process? Because yeah, we don't even know how we're doing. So it's not all, this is a little bit exaggerating maybe, but I think that it's a very important element that we will need to address. Now, why is it important? Also because quite a few companies somehow they realize S&OP is important because of all the KPIs and all the big promises. So they get on with it, and then we will find that in day one, of course, that it's not perfect. We want to get in continuous improvement. Plan, do, check, act. So we plan the actions. What are we going to do? We apply those decisions that we take in the process. We check the results. And then we basically, if we're not happy about it, we adjust the actions. We call this the Deming cycle. Important in any professional process. Very pragmatic, very effective. It does assume, though, that that there's a check. We can measure the effectiveness of our decisions. And that exists in S&OP. There should be KPIs. There should be, but because the horizon is so long and it's a monthly process, really slow. This improvement process is extremely slow. It works. It can work, but yeah, you can imagine that it's not so effective and it's not so fast. So this is remember this one because that's an important one. So there's a few things to summarize that I call intrinsic characteristics that make it difficult to implement and run. There's participants from different functions. They need to take decisions that they are used to take within their own functions. For example, finance takes decisions about finance, but they don't really see the impact of those decisions on, for example, marketing or on manufacturing, not so clearly. The why of S&OP is important, but actually for them it's not always so clear. Yes, I understand the maybe the KPIs for the whole company, but why me? Why? I mean, I'm in marketing. Why do I need to be concerned about manufacturing, for example? That's somebody else. It's not always clear that optimizing your functional KPIs, for example, if I'm in supply chain, I'm trying to minimize my stocks. How does that impact, I don't know, marketing or sales? How does it impact another function? Of course, if you think about it, you may realize it, but it may not be really in your guts that you really feel it. And then we talked about the speed of the process. So there's a number of characteristics that we will need to address if we want to get to a successful process. Now we get to the reason of the presentation in this session, because what we find in our consulting and also in our training, that serious games and simulations can address at least part of these issues. And dependent on the S&OP maturity, we use two different serious games that I mean you all you know in change, so I'm sure you know the games as well. For an S&OP process, we use the fresh connection. Because what we see there is there's 4 roles: sales, supply chain, operations, and sourcing. And what is so these roles are typically also in a real life situation running an S&OP process. In a more advanced process, we call it IBP. Finance takes a much bigger role, so there we take the cool connection. And what is the essence of those two games is that it's 4 different functions, like in the actual S&OP or IBP process, that need to align to create a profitable business. That's what these games are about. That's I mean, there's lots of lessons in there, but these games, what the most obvious lesson that people take away from it is that we have to have a strategy and we have to align along that strategy. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get these companies profitable, which happens to be exactly what we're trying to do in an S&OP or IBP process. And what we then do, and you may have seen this today more often as well, is in these simulations we apply the magic circle. You see that on the left-hand side. So basically what we typically do is we don't tell anything. We just let people get on with the game. We call this the experience. We play around and then we basically say we make them reflect. So what happened? Was it successful? Let's look at your KPIs. How did it go? How did you take decisions? And then we have a discussion about it, and then we basically try and conceptualize that. So can we maybe take one step back and see what really happened? take the lessons, apply one lesson, maybe two lessons, and then let's do another round. And by using specific scripts, people basically they basically design on the fly an S&OP or IBP process depending on how we run the simulations. And the insights that people get, that if you don't have a clear strategy, like you mentioned in the beginning, it's going to be really difficult to be profitable. And even if you have a strategy, but you don't have an S&OP process to align the different functions, it doesn't work.
Excuse me, Hans.
Yep.
Sorry for interrupting you. It's just that whereas we've spent some time defining S&OP, I'm a little uncertain as to what IBP is, and and it's a bit of a concern for me because I actually train with the Cool Connection. So can you provide any guidance, please, on that?
Yeah, I can. Given the time, I'll make it short, but there is, I think the main characteristic is that sales and operations planning, in the heart is the first point, is the first picture that I showed. Remember, with the demand and supply balancing? So the main functions there focus on demand. So how much volume are we going to sell? Do we think we are going to sell in future? And then looking towards the supply side, well, can you deliver? Do we have the capacities? Do we have the stocks? Do we have the materials? Can be supplied? So that's what I call an S&OP process. It focuses on making sure that demand and supply are balanced so that the supply side can meet the demand. That's how I would call really roughly S&OP objective. What changes with integrated business planning? A lot of things, so I'm going to oversimplify a little bit, but the main thing that changes is that we include financial plans as well. So in any company, there's basically two big cycles, two planning cycles. The one that I just described, the demand planning, supply planning, short-term and mid-term. That's one planning cycle. The other planning cycle is basically the financial performance cycle that starts with budgeting and then maybe quarterly updates, etc. So they're managing the financial results of the company, revenues and margins and whatever. They both have the same horizons, they're planning processes, but in essence, they are not linked. They're basically in their own silos running in parallel. And what IBP is doing, that's why it's called integrated business planning, it is trying to merge those two cycles. So you get one plan for the whole company in volume, you translate the volumes to value and make sure that they are balanced. And in the IBP process, you then say, well, if you've got a strategy as well with our objectives, very often it's value-based, and we're going to make sure that in this IBP process, if we see a gap between our objectives, financial objectives, and what we believe that the plan is going to deliver, if there are gaps, they can also be addressed in this same planning cycle. So it's a much more elaborate, wider process with more functions at the table, more complex also, but it really focuses on delivering the strategy.
So does IBP, so is S&OP part of IBP? Is S&OP a prerequisite for IBP?
Correct. So you start basically, we call this maturity levels. The first maturity level is basically short-term S&OP process, just volumes. The second level is the same, but then longer planning horizon. So you get bigger decisions, longer term out. So with a longer planning horizon, and then the next step is to move from S&OP to IBP. So the basis remains and stays there. Of course, you still need to do the demand supply balancing, but you use the same data, the same assumptions to also move to value to make sure that you then have one plan based on the same set of data.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm relieved because that's how I teach it.
No, super. Then it's just terminology.
But I have a second question, if I may.
Sure.
But not a third, just a second. Now, with regard to sales and operations planning being 50 years old, yet still being cutting edge, in your experience, have you observed context where it actually has an easier time working and continuing rather than others? That is, you've presented a model for S&OP success, and that's fine. But just from your practice, from your experience, are there corporate contexts that are more propitious for sales and operations planning?
No, I think it's a very good question, and there's not an easy answer to that in my view. The main thing that I think is important is that S&OP is a high maintenance process in all cases. And if there's a crisis, everybody will be there. But if there's not a crisis, then people will basically get on with their own jobs. And I think the challenge is to make sure that you always that the process always delivers sufficient value for everybody. So you have to keep reinventing it. The concept, the framework remains, but the question is, what do we need to change the frequencies? Do we have still the right participants? If this is what we need to decide, do you have the right data? So you keep evaluating and make sure that everybody that's at the table is relevant and gets enough value from that process.
From my perspective, I think I have a definition for contexts where S&OP works better. One of the clever things that supply chain does is involve capacity calculation to verify promises before they're upheld. And I think that where sales and operations planning is really is an obvious win is where we have different lead times, because the sales and operations planning is based on the future from the cumulative lead time, and yet there are different processes in the company that compete for resources. And so from my perspective, the rough cut capacity magic works particularly in sales and operations planning, where you have different processes in a company that add up to the time horizon of the tactical horizon.
Yeah,
and
I think that's spot on again.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's spot on again. So basically, what we do, what I find quite best practice is basically we even separate the short and the midterm. Short term we call sales and operations execution. This for the smaller decisions, typically 2-3 months horizon, and the rough cut, longer term out, 12 months or 18 months rolling. We don't need the details, but we really need to understand the trends, the big developments, to make sure and check whether we will be prepared once the moment is there that we reach them. So time horizons, lead times are very important. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Okay, super. Thanks.
Hans, Johan here. Just an observation quickly, and maybe just checking. What I understood previously when we did the press connection and then the cool connection came about, that was also to take into account additional constraints. But by doing the financial instruments, you were actually able to alleviate some constraints. It was not necessarily physical constraints that you had in normal, like the fresh connection and sales and operations planning, and ultimately to work to feasible plans.
Definitely. And so again, this starts to link back to the S&OP IBP discussion, where if it's only S&OP with sales and marketing and operations at the table, there's only so much you can decide. If you get more functions at the table, for example, finance, that also has instruments to relieve constraints, or to, like in the cool connection, get more financial instruments to make sure that you can keep growing, or invest in time, or so absolutely, and you get more. It gets more complex, but also you get more possibilities.
Yeah, no,
and
great.
I just wanted to address that in. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. I just wanted to contribute to your and David's conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, thanks. I think you're capturing the essence already. And what you will see is that's not the main topic of this presentation, but what we already discussing now is that S&OP is not one thing. It really depends on what sort of company you are, whether you've got financial constraints, whether you've got capacity constraints, whether you've got an easy market to forecast or a very volatile demand. And dependent on all those questions, the process may look different. And you may need different people at the table. You may want to have different data. And therefore also the competency development to realize this, you can't just buy a book and learn about S&OP. You can, but and that it will give you the basics. But if you want to learn and discover, etc., then you can try and do that in real life. It works, but it's going to be slow. If you do it in a simulation, you write the scripts and you tune the game such that it gives you is representative for your own situation. You can learn much faster and improve the process. Yeah, and we do this quite often in real life, and it's extremely effective. Okay, super. Well, thanks for those contributions. I think we need to hurry up a little bit. I'm not sure how hard the constraints are time-wise, but actually, in fact, we have more or less gone through the deck anyway, and the main message you got really clear. I brought a few examples where we used this exact concept. For example, at Henkel, one of our big customers, they were doing a big re-implementation because their process wasn't working. So what we were doing was basically in the initiation steps, we did a day training. Let's explain the new process. Then we played the full day, the fresh connection, where they applied the S&OP process, their S&OP process in this virtual environment. And then day number 3, we would plan it so that that they would be running an S&OP meeting in that next day. And basically, we could hold the mirror based on all the lessons that they had before, reflecting on the fresh connection mainly. And what we found was that only day 3 did they start to realize and did it sink in why their process was not running as satisfactory as they wanted, and it was very, very successful to in the end how this process got started. So very nice. This was another example. Let's skip it for sake of time. I think we need to wrap up, and I think you got the essence really well. The takeaways that I would like to you to get from this is, well, S&OP and also IBP can add fantastic value. Now you know about the process, and we also have found that when you implement it, try and sustain it, it's simple. It's not so complex, but it's hard. It's generally quite tough still. And a part of the problem is it's such a slow process. Long feedback loop is quite conceptual, so it's not a process that sales particularly likes. And learning and development is really slow, and therefore simulation that we use in consulting and in learning and development, our experience is it can be extremely effective in getting the buy-in, and people also like the games. It's a safe environment. If you make a mistake, it doesn't really matter. And because you don't need to wait a year before you get the results of your decisions, but it takes an hour, yeah, of course, it's going to be much faster. You accelerate the learning. Okay, that's it from my side. Any final questions before we wrap up?
There is a question in the chat. Can you please share a bit on your recent experience in the developments in the APS technologies?
Okay, in APS, in advanced planning systems. Sorry, I'm checking the question because I can't read it.
Yeah. No, it's advanced planning systems. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. I think in advanced planning systems have been quite stable for many years with optimizers, etc. So that's all very nice. I think in the past 10 years, maybe, we've seen a development that was starting to give more flexibility around a number of essential S&OP requirements. Now, one of them is running scenarios. So if this happens, what would happen? Simulate it, look at the results. You don't like it, yes, we do. And then you sort of activate one scenario. 10 years ago, that would have been difficult, even 5 years ago. Nowadays, that's starting to become the norm. A second one, I think, is what I would call aggregation, disaggregation. So being able to look at your data at a higher level, not at the SKU, the lowest detail, but also at a higher level for the longer term. And systems work there much easier and more flexible than in the past. So there's a few of those sort of concrete functions. Of course, the big development that is happening at the moment is the use of, let's say, the move to the cloud, where things become not a little bit faster, but orders of magnitude faster. So I can play with those scenarios more or less in a meeting and just check for with huge amounts of data, what's going to happen if we do this. And slowly, a bit overpromised today still, but I'm sure it's going to be extremely useful, is the role of machine learning, for example, in demand forecasting, where you not only extrapolate history with some smart algorithm with smoothing or whatever, but you also use sales drivers that says, well, if this happens, what's going to be the impact on the sales volumes? And these systems learn and they get better at it. And that's, well, the systems, the vendors promise it's all there. Our experience is not so easy yet, and definitely not automatic, but the potential is definitely there and it's going to be extremely powerful. Does that answer your question?
Yes, no, thank you. Typically that last two that you mentioned, the role of machine learning and artificial intelligence is definitely coming to the fore, and then also shortening the cycles. You can do much more regular S&OP processes than in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. More data-driven, less opinions, more facts. You can take external data. You can so the amount of data doesn't matter anymore. These systems will process them really fast. So that's really going to change. And there's a number of systems that promise it. I think there's only a few that really can live up to it, to the promise. But that definitely within now and a few years, this is going to be the norm. The world is really going to change a lot.
Thank you, Hans. Unfortunately, we have to close this session down because we have to move on to the next one. So I thank you for the session, Hans, for you being here and speaking during Exchange Connect. And for all the current participants, feel free to join the next session of Ed Week on a masterclass of experiencing the Blue Connection. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.